Those of you who know about my personal history with Maserati, both in terms of reviewing them and owning them, know that even though I absolutely adore the brand, it's been patchy at best, much like it is for many people. Even people who don't own Maseratis and probably never would have existing opinions of why they would never buy one due to reliability, the cost of parts. They have a certain reputation, which is unfortunate because aside from that, Maseratis offer a whole lot. They look fantastic, they sound fantastic, they're actually very comfortable, more so than you'd think in some cases. They're certainly not slow, and they are very, very exotic. Plus, they're far more affordable used than something like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, even though it has a Ferrari engine. It's literally a Ferrari F136 generation motor in this car, the F430 engine, for all intents and purposes, with some different parts and in a lower state of tune. Now this one incidentally shares that same engine with the earlier Gran Turismo as well, which I also reviewed in this same series, and that car blew me away. It was everything I wanted a Maserati to be. Now the shrewd among you will have noticed that at the start of this video, there was no opening ad for a dealership, such as the ones that I would usually have. And the reason for that, for those who don't already know and who didn't watch my car reveal video a couple of days ago on the channel, is because, yeah, this is my car. I decided to take the risk again and buy my second Quattroporte. My other one was a 2005. With that automated manual, the Cambia Corsa 4.2, this is the ZF 4.2. In particular, mine is a 2009. The entire run of the M139 Quattroporte ran from 2003 to 2012. Now, of course, there are multiple generations before that, and a more current one after as well. The facelift happened in 2008, and this particular one, as I said, has the 4.2 rather than the 4.7 on the higher performance models such as the GTS and that ZF gearbox. Now that ZF transmission is incidentally used in the Aston DB9, the BMW 6 Series, the Jag XJ, the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the Jag XKR, funnily enough, the Aston DBS, the Bentley Brooklands, the Aston Rapide, the Virage, and the facelift Vanquish. So it's a pretty heavily used gearbox, and it's used in a lot more cars than just that, but those are some of the highlights. Now, the key difference when it comes to that gearbox is it's an actual automatic. It's not an automated manual, and the placement of the gearbox is totally different as well. In the older models, it has a transaxle, which gives you more weight over the rear end. Now this one retains that, but it's not quite as much. Now, for example, the older car had that cambio right back with the rear diff. That transmission was all the way at the back. It also had dry sump lubrication, kind of like a race car. This one returns to wet sump, more traditionally, and that ZF is bolted right to the back of the engine up front, or rather a front mid-engine layout, to give it a very impressive weight distribution for an otherwise very large, long 2-ton limo. Now the difference in weight distribution is very notable between the two cars, and some purists, as well as preferring the Cambio style transmission, say that they hate the new weight distribution. Personally, I've owned both, driven both extensively. I like them both. To me, they're both just as good, and this one is good for different reasons. Because sure, the older car, you could argue maybe it's a couple of tenths of a second quicker through this or that particular corner, but in reality, that does not matter 99% of the time. I want a car that is not just fast and looks good and sounds good, but is actually as reliable as I hope it would be. This one takes steps by Maserati to do just that. It's not going to be without its issues, I'm already well aware of that, but at least they have tried to improve it in those ways. It's not just about performance. Now the difference in that weight distribution is 53% over the rear end in the older car to the 51 in this car. So interestingly, this still has more weight over the back end, and that brings me to one of, if not my favourite thing, about the Quattroporte. I would actually say, if you're a petrol head, you need to drive a Quattroporte at some point. You don't need to own one, necessarily. I'm not asking you to fall in love with it. Please just trust me here. Drive a Quattroporte of this generation, either the older one or the facelift, that M139 shape, just so that you can experience the handling that I'm talking about. Because despite the fact that I've reviewed and driven dozens of cars on very wildly on price and performance, the Quattroporte remains one of my favourite handling cars I've ever driven. And it's a privilege to have not only driven them but actually owned cars with that good level of handling. I would say without question the Quattroporte has better handling and steering than the Jag XKR does, which is insane given that one is a strict GT car and this is a much larger, heavier limo. It's almost unbelievable, but trust me, it literally is that good. In fact, the Quattroporte has better handling than the Gran Turismo does. That's how far I would go with that argument, because of that weight distribution and its very, very unique handling signature. Now, of course, we need to touch briefly on the engine and the performance. It is a Ferrari F136 series engine. It puts out just under 400 horsepower, 340 pound-feet of torque, which is about 460 newton meters. And of course, this is the lower grade model. Technically, you can get the faster ones like the GTS, but that didn't really appeal to me, plus I didn't want to pay the extra money, quite frankly. In terms of performance though, it's not exactly lacking. 5.5 seconds to 60, 170 miles an hour. Even the fuel economy for a 2-ton Ferrari engine car with not the best torque in the world on paper is actually not bad. Officially, it's like 13 to the gallon in the city, 27 on the motorway, and an average of 19. Most owners actually say they get better than those figures, an average of 20 to 23 overall, which in other words is roughly the same as I get from the Jag anyway. Plus, this has a 90-litre tank, which is just under 20 UK gallons. So if, for instance, you need to go on a longer journey, you should be expecting 400 to 450 miles out of that tank if you drive it on, for instance, cruise control at a decent speed on the motorway. If that's 400 miles through, back lanes, then it'll drop considerably, probably more like 350. And if you put your foot down, probably more like 300. Now, for me, I'm more of a cruiser. I don't push my cars hard most of the time, so for me, this car is kind of perfect for what I want. It looks great, it sounds great, and it's fun at all speeds. You don't have to push it to its limits. Another interesting difference between this one and my older one is that I would personally say this car is more comfortable as well. Now, it's possible that it's just in better condition than my other one was. That's entirely possible, but it does feel to me like they've improved some of the ride quality overall. It's a very, very smooth car. And the older Quattroporte, even though I said it was comfortable at the time, I think it was more of the rose-tinted glasses, whereas now I'm being more objective about this, and it is still comfortable. It's a very smooth ride. Now, the key issue with owning a Maserati, not just this one or any one, is always going to be the repairs, the parts, the servicing, all that kind of stuff, the aftercare, if you will. And it's not just about the price, it's that you have to, for example, source those parts. And in a lower production run, more exotic, Ferrari-related vehicle, of course it's going to be more awkward to get parts. Many times you'll have to source them from Italy, for example. I'm well aware of this, and I decided to make that risk, or take that risk, again. That's your choice to make, though. So of course, if you're looking for an easier life, then absolutely go for something like a Jag, an XKR, an XFR, even an XJR. They do offer fantastic levels of performance, comfort, and far cheaper prices across the board than something like a Maserati, and at the end of the day, that is one of the reasons why I bought one, and I may even do so again in future, who knows. But a Maserati is not just another car. You don't buy it because you can find a better option, you buy it because you want a Maserati. That's kind of the point. So for me, there are certain cars that aren't worth the risk. Like for me, for example, I don't see myself buying a TVR. Because to me, it isn't really worth the risk. I don't believe that I would get enough out of a TVR ownership experience to justify the risk of owning one. In the case of this one, the car gives me what I need. The only change that I would really make to a car like this is that I would personally like to see what it feels like with all-wheel drive. But to be honest, as I said, the handling is so stable and the steering is so good and so involving. The car just tells you exactly what it's going to do at all times. I don't really need all-wheel drive. And for me to say that, for those who know my taste in cars, says a lot. This is that good that I don't really need all-wheel drive out of it. It has buttons for all kinds of things anyway, rear sun protector that folds up electronically on the window. You've got low grip mode for when you're driving in ice or rain, which adjusts the driving style. And that is the primary issue. It has so many complex electronics that if something's going to go wrong, it does tend to be those. However, my biggest piece of advice when getting or considering a Maserati like this one or an older one, a newer one, is don't try to go for the cheapest one. Try to go for one which has had fewer owners, has a good history, and I'm not just talking about servicing, check its MOT history as well. And having stuff changed isn't necessarily a bad thing. That means that those parts are new after all. Check for instance for lower mileage. This one has about half the miles of the other Maserati that I bought, which makes a massive difference to a car like this. Those kind of things can make a world of difference between absolutely hating it and absolutely loving it. Be shrewd when it comes to driving a vehicle like this and buying a vehicle like this. Don't rush into it, consider it. I certainly had my doubts when I did it myself. Right up until signing the agreement, I still wasn't entirely sure, and the anxiety was still there because of my past experience. So far, I'm loving the car. Of course I'll end up hating it at some point because something will inevitably go wrong, but that always happens with a car. If you own it for long enough, something is gonna break. The question is just how complex is it, how expensive is it, and does it affect your experience moving forward? As I always like to say, it is absolutely a calculated risk. You just need to decide if it's a risk you personally want to take. But those are my thoughts on this Quattroporte versus the older one. I would say unequivocally it is a far superior car to the older one, far better gearbox, better ride quality. The looks on this one have grown on me as well, even though I could see you going either way. They both look great. The performance is great, of course the sound is. So overall, it's a whole lot of car for the money, but it is a risk. You need to choose if that risk is worth it to you. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts. Of course, check out my review for that older Quattroporte as well to make a comparison for yourself, and stick around on the channel for more content related to this car, including hopefully getting those mufflers removed. And of course you can check out the reviews for the Gran Turismo and the 4200 here on the channel as well. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.